If you ask me, I think Colson Montgomery has the highest upside of all the young players currently up. And I'll discuss why on today's episode of Locked On White Sox.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan and contributor for SouthsideShowdown.com, part of the fan side of the network. And also I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. Additionally, follow or subscribe to the show on your preferred podcast platforms. CHSN had a segment discussing which of the young players has the highest ceiling. Well, I disagree on Grant Taylor being at the top of their pyramid. Let's discuss why I think it's Colson Montgomery in the first segment. Then I got a proposal for you regarding Luis Robert Jr.'s future. And finally, let's do a Way Back Wednesday segment, recapping a Hall of Famer achieving a milestone. This episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com. All right, so I'll admit I only watched the Twitter video on CHSN where David Haw went over his ceiling pyramid of the young players that the Sox currently have up right now. You know, it's about a minute segment that they had. And I also know David Haw's opinions. They can be out there. You know, I've never, though, had a problem with Haw. I know some of you do. I know some of you guys aren't scoreheads. I'm a scorehead. I prefer to score over ESPN 1000. It's just my preference. I do think Haw has gotten better as a TV and radio personality. And I've always enjoyed his writing when he was writing for the Chicago Tribune. And I like his appreciation for the MAC conference. Because if there's one conference that's going to fill your football void, it's the MAC. However, I do disagree with him when he had Grant Taylor as his high ceiling player during the segment that they had on, I think it was CHSN Sports Night, I think is the title of the show. Again, I know I have the show up here in Milwaukee. I should consume more, but I really only watch CHSN's broadcast for the White Sox games and Blackhawks, for example. And I get Haw's logic. You know, Taylor has great stuff. And he's got the potential to be a number one starter or an amazing high leverage reliever in the Mason Miller mold. But I'm going to diverge from him, and I'm going to go with Colson based on, first of all, the evidence you and I have seen. That's one reason, because the other reason, too, is Grant Taylor, he's only going to take the ball either a few days a week if he's a reliever, or if he is eventually made a starter, he's still only going to then take the ball every 5 days for 5 or 6 innings, because that's what modern starters are doing. Colson is going to be playing every day, whether it's at short or third. And if you think about it too, this organization is already concerned enough with Grant Taylor's arm that they don't know if he can handle a starter's load. That's one of the reasons why he was sent to the bullpen. They're not sure his arm is going to handle that type of workload. So that could take his ceiling off the table. You know, physically, can Grant Taylor hold up? That will be the issue. And then when you look also at Colson's ceiling, you know, we're starting to see evidence that maybe he can actually reach that Corey Seager ceiling that scouts throughout. I mean, and think about it. Corey Seager is considered one of the best pure hitters in the game. I mean, someone named a stat after him in terms of, like, you know, how he swings the bat and all the contact that he makes. And that was the ceiling. And I know you can go back every dayers and newcomers. Go back to some episodes where I was like, I don't know. Maybe it might be more of that Paul DeYoung floor where he hits 20 to 30 home runs a year, but has a very low average, strikes out a ton. But we're starting to see actually that it could be that scouts weren't lying. I mean, he's also showing that he can play outstanding defense at short. He had an amazing double play last night with runners at first and second. No outs. It's looking sketchy. You got Cal Riley, the big dumper, at the plate. And there's Colson Montgomery fielding a line ball, you know, bouncing ground ball that may have not gotten the double play at second, races to second, and then throws a seed to first to get Riley out. Now, I know it's a catcher, but still. And if you think about it, Montgomery can factor into not only scoring runs, which helps you win, but run prevention, which helps you win in the field, where Taylor is only factoring into run prevention. And I know I'm splitting hairs here, and I'm not trying to disregard pitching. because pitching is just as important as hitting. And if you have good pitching, it can keep you in games, but you still got to score runs. That's why sometimes, you got to figure out what's more valuable. And in the case of Colson, he's providing value because he can impact the game with his glove, if it stays at what we're seeing, and with his ability to hit and score runs. And what we're seeing too in terms of overall impact, you're just seeing it a lot more with Montgomery lately. And you think about it, this man just hit his 8th home run in his 26th big league game last night. And if you want even more impressive context, and I'm not talking about how he hit it like 110 miles an hour, all that stuff, and he basically blasted it off almost to the upper deck, which that's also impressive. But if you want to be more impressive context, that was his 8th home run in his 12th game. And I get though it was an empty calories home run, as it did come in the 9th inning of an 8-3 blowout loss to the Mariners. But still, he's hitting the ball a country mile. He's showing off impressive power. Thank God for the torpedo bat. He's showing that he can make adjustments. He's already shown that he's mentally tough enough to handle adversity. And if he can provide that 30 home run power that the next great White Sox team desperately needs, that is going to have a huge impact every day. Where Grant Taylor, I'm not poo-pooing Grant Taylor. Even if he is just like the Mason Miller comp, you just saw what Mason Miller got traded for, which was a huge haul of talented prospects, the number 3 overall prospect per MLB pipeline. And you are envisioning Grant Taylor getting, if he's, again, the Mason Miller type comp, you're envisioning him getting some big outs to help you win. And I know Colson has his back issues. Can his body handle being a shortstop? But if it can't, that's one of the reasons why I've argued that you might have to move him to third too, is just for, can his body handle it? He's showing that he's got some potential at third. Obviously, he still needs to learn the finer details of that position. And I did an episode on that I think, was it last week or 2 weeks ago, about how, hey, it would have been nice if he gotten reps at third base, like everybody was saying. And I guess maybe you can put them on the pyramid at the top together. You can. I mean, they're definitely tier 1s right now, at least for what you're seeing. And especially how Colson's come a long way. I mean, remember, he was so bad in April at AAA that he was dropped from the top 100 rankings by most prospect services, especially MLB Pipeline. Got sent to Glendale, Arizona to rework on his swing at the spring training facility. But now you're seeing a potential future superstar. Now, again, and go back a couple episodes I talked about, there's a couple of hurdles that he needs to clear. But I'm loving the ride right now. And if you're looking at this potential ceiling pyramid, like if you're putting it into a pyramid like CHSN did, I think you could put Colson at the top. Taylor, based on maybe the impact, if you do want to split hairs, maybe he's actually at the second level, or again at the top. But definitely second level, I got Kyle Teel and Edgar Caro, because again, their floor is solid catchers. And if you can have a 1-2 catching combo like them and just have one of them DH on the days that they're not catching, or again, have Kyle Teel play the outfield, that type of stuff, you got like that right there where they're at, and they've got the potential to be all-stars. At the next level, I got Shane Smith and Sean Burkus. Again, their stuff still can potentially at least be a very good number 2 in the rotation, but their floor, as you see with their struggles, could be a solid number 4. And then the base is Miguel Vargas, Chase Mydroth, Brooks Baldwin, Davis Martin, Mike Vassell, Brandon Eisert, and Jonathan Cannon. I could be convinced to add Lenine Sosa and Jordan Leisure. I just think Sosa, he's walking such a tightrope as a value player. He did homer yesterday, with the value of being a decent slug and a decent average guy. But if he doesn't walk, I'm not sure he can sustain being a near 750 OPS hitter. And Leisure, he's just got to be more consistent. Well, one guy who still has a high ceiling is Luis Robert Jr. Gabe Ramirez did point that out on CHSN, and it got me thinking, he's going to be here next year and potentially beyond. Would it make sense to at least try to extend him? Let's discuss my proposal after the break. Today's episode is brought to you by Gameday Hue, and so is this hat I'm wearing. For White Sox fans like me, this one hits the mark. Gameday Hue makes clean, no logo gear with team-inspired colorways for every pro and college fan base. It's all about letting your colors speak to you for you. No giant logos, just smart, versatile style that works on game day, on the course, or anywhere in between. And you know me, I love my hats. You know, I got a big old bald spot for those watching, receding hairline, so I need my hats to cover up, Father Time catching up with me. And I love how it fits so comfortably. I actually gave one to my father-in-law, loves wearing it too. And it's not just hats. Check out this split shade gloves that they have. Made for the golf course or the perfect gift for the fan who has everything. I can't wait to grip it and rip it with this nice fitting glove. And right now you can get 15% off with code MLB15 at GamedayHue.com. That's Gameday, HUE.com. The code even tracks on bundle deals, so now's the time to load up. Let your colors talk because colors speak louder than words. That's GamedayHue.com, code MLB15. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, make sure to hit the like button on today's episode and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And if you can't catch the show on YouTube, Locked On White Sox is available on all major podcast platforms, so make sure to follow or subscribe on places such as Apple or Spotify. Either way, get your 30-minute fix of Chicago White Sox baseball venting with me. All right, so suddenly Luis Robert Jr. seems happy to be in Chicago. I think that's what he told Scott Merkin and the press. Scott Merkin had a write-up. I know Jim Margulis of SoxMachine.com suggested a few days ago maybe the culture is changing. And maybe Luis Robert Jr. starting to like baseball again. Went yard off a righty last night. Part of the empty calorie home runs that him and Colson hit, but still, you want to see power. And Will's boys don't quit. And obviously for those championing LRJ not being traded, and there were a lot of you, and also championing that the White Sox should pick up his $20 million option, you could be right. And again, I can take being allowed wrong. I was in the opposite camp. But I can take being allowed wrong because in that instance, it means you got the good Luis Robert Jr. I've just seen too much data where it may not happen. But if he's good again, I mean good beyond being a decent base runner, elite center fielder, and hits lefties, basically, so he's got to hit righties and hit for more power. Okay, great. I'm not going to be like, oh, get him off the team still. I got to be right. No, I'll admit I'm not loud wrong there. And I hope I'm wrong because if I'm right, it means they wasted an opportunity to still get something for him. And instead, you're paying him $2 million to go away. And also, some of you might have a higher risk capacity than me. And that's fine too. And I know GM Chris Getz does, as you can see. But I'm still not sure if he carries this 959 OPS with 4 home runs over the past 30 days through the next 2 months. I don't know if that's going to happen where that's going to move the needle for contenders to meet Getz' high asking price in that trade. And that's in a trade. And that's why I'm suggesting making this proposal because, yeah, he could have a monster second half. I mean, he's already having a great 30 days. I just said 959 OPS. The average is now well above, so what, I think at 219. Still not great overall, but you've seen what he's done the last 30 days. But I think the injury history and the production swings in terms of from great to bad, they're always going to leave a contender pointing to that as why they're never going to pay dollar for dollar or even a markup in a trade. I just think that's always going to exist. So then I'm going to go to those. I'm going to go to the argument of those who've championed, hey, there's no one projected to play in elite defensive center field for the next good team right now. You don't. You're right. There's really nobody in the system right now that you could say that guy is going to cover as much ground and prevent as many runs as possible like Luis Robert Jr. can. I agree with you. Brooks Baldwin can potentially adequately play the position, but yeah, you want a guy that can run like Luis Robert Jr. can to run down potential doubles and triples and steal runs, basically, and take them away. And it got me thinking, should the White Sox actually then make a run to Luis Robert Jr. in terms of extending him. And then that way you can also avoid this ships in the nights passing, because I think that's the other thing that everybody's been forgetting. He's only under club control for 2 more years. So if the team does get better and does get competitive, like to the point where they can actually compete for a division or a wild card spot, like we're all hoping for in 2027, that's the last year of club control. And now I know I'm sounding like I'm contradicting myself when I said, Luis Robert Jr. probably isn't signing an extension because he's represented by Scott Boras. And Scott Boras rarely, if ever, signs extensions. He's always going to take his guys to the market. But maybe Boras should realize Luis Robert Jr. is probably only worth $20 million to just one team, the White Sox. So if Boras wants to guarantee his client that $40 million, because he's got two $20 million options open, do you maybe spread those two options out over, say, 4 years? Give him a 4-year, $40 million extension. Now, I'm not sure the MLBPA would approve taking LRJ's average value from 20 million to 10 million, because that's the answer the Google machine spit out. I did try, can you renegotiate a player option? And at least the answers that I got in terms of what I was looking at was you need, obviously, the player's consent and MLBPA approval. So maybe LRJ's like, I don't want to go that far down. Yeah, you can guarantee me 20 million. 40 million potentially, but I don't want to go from 20 million to 10 million, basically. But the market has repeatedly screamed back that they were viewing Luis Robert Jr. as a rental. So he was not guaranteed that $20 million next year. And if he did suffer a major injury to whoever traded him, or, he was getting bought out for $2 million. And if he did struggle, he was getting bought out for $2 million. And if he's a buyout guy, that means you're probably on a $5 million prove-it deal like Yoan Moncada got from the Angels. $7 million? Do you want $40 million? I'll ask you that. So I'm just saying, why not tell Boras, I can guarantee your client the $40 million over 4 years. Or let's even create some new money to take, the average value at least down to like what it is right now, $15 million. Make it 3 years, $45 million. Again, your AAV, if my math is correct, is $15 million. Now for LRJ, you might be saying, again, this proposal, I know I'm going back and forth, but maybe he's like, well, if I get back to the 2023 form, then I'm severely getting underpaid and I'm keeping myself from free agency until I'm either 31 or 32. And that's definitely when teams get very reluctant to commit to long-term years unless you're a pitcher. However, there's a good chance he never earns $40 million on any other team except the White Sox. And why would the White Sox do this? Well, for the very reasons I keep hearing and reading of those arguing why he should stay. You need a center fielder long-term, and I keep hearing $20 million is a drop in the bucket these days. Although remember, except for the White Sox, they still have not signed a guy to a $100 million contract. The most that I think they ever went was, again, Yoan Moncada. And that's how they spread out, what is $73 million extension or something for 25, that final year was $25 million. This 20, you can say, well, the $20 million, it's a team option. But if you can get this guy to, figure out, that, hey, my floor is still good enough to hit lefties, run the bases, and play elite defense. Still not sure I would pay over $10 million for that, because that's essentially what a role player is. But if you factor in his ceiling of being an all-star, maybe you can stomach that $15 million. Or again, maybe you go 4-year, $60 million to get an extension. I'm not saying it's crazy. I'm just throwing it out there. Leave some comments on the YouTube page and the episode page. I'm not going to fight you on that. Just throwing it out there, kind of was something I was thinking about. Well, it is Way Back Wednesday. Let's discuss Tom Seaver achieving a Hall of Fame milestone with the White Sox. That happened this week, 40 years ago, and that's after the break. Ever wish managing your money felt easier with Monarch Money? It can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. And Monarch Money has been great for my wife and I to track our finances. She loves it because it's made budgeting easier and less stressful. I love it because it allows me to track my 401k and Roth IRA. I would like to retire before I'm like, say, 70. And Monarch Money is helping me there by showing me especially what I can cut back on. And again, track all the investments that I got. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONMLB for half off your first year. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Shout out to all you everydayers. I appreciate your loyalty and recommend to your fellow Sox fans or baseball fans, friends, to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox or wherever you get their podcasts, as this show is available on all major podcast platforms. All right, so I always associate Tom Seaver being with the Mets. I mean, when I look back, obviously I was barely conscious when he was pitching. I was but a wee little lad when he retired. But still, when you look at the history, you look at the narrative of baseball, Tom Seaver and the Mets. In fact, my nephew, he's starting to collect baseball cards. And he gave my father-in-law a Tom Seaver Cincinnati Reds card. And my father-in-law grew up in Ohio, so he still got some loyalty to the Reds. And I was like, Tom Seaver pitched for the Reds? Really? That type of stuff. And I mean, he did. He pitched 12 years for them. He won a World Series, 3 Cy Youngs for the Amazons. But he also did, as I said, he pitched for the Reds, White Sox, and Red Sox during his 20-year career. And he reached his 300th career victory with the Palhos in 1985. And, the reason why I know I've poo-pooed wins and losses now for the modern day pitcher, because again, these pitchers are only going 5-6 innings. And it's more because, again, what we're understanding about the game when you look at the splits. And some of you may not like it, but again, most guys through the third time in the order are getting rocked. That's kind of the logic. And yes, they are getting paid way more. And guys are throwing different pitches that put more stress that could lead to more injury. So, I just think it's more of we're all getting used to there's only so many figurative pitches in those arms. Although it does seem back in the day, there was a lot of pitches in those guys' arms. But wins and losses obviously did matter in 1985 because that's when guys were still pitching well over 200 innings. And especially when it comes to Seaver, wins and losses mattered because he pitched 231 career complete games. That's right. If I read Baseball Reference right, 231 complete games. That is unheard of in today's day and age. I honestly think an owner committing, because Seaver probably would have been making, 20, 30 million if he could, put up the same production in this day and age. I think owners would literally run out them themselves and tackle him before getting to the 9th inning to preserve his arm. And Seaver basically put a stamp on his Hall of Fame career on August 4th, 1985, when the Sox beat the Yankees in New York, of all places, 4-1 behind Seaver's complete game effort that gave him win number 300. And think about this. He threw 145 pitches in that game to reach that win milestone. And he was 40 that season. Here's what the New York Times wrote at the time, and this is the only write-up I could find archival. I tried to find the Sun-Times write-up. I tried to find the Chicago Tribune. Instead, here's what the New York Times wrote. When it was over, Seaver, clearly drained after throwing 145 pitches, rushed to a box near the White Sox dugout and embraced his wife and family. He was presented with an engraved bull by Phil Niekro of the Yankees. Then he faced the news media in a half-hour press conference and returned to the visiting clubhouse, where he was drenched in a traditional champagne shower. Quote, "Let's not wait another 19 years to do this," he said, end quote. Seaver gave up a run-scoring single to Ken Griffey in the 3rd inning. Ken Griffey Sr., for the record, in the 3rd inning. Then he received 4 runs in the 6th and retired 12 of 13 batters during run stretch before struggling in the 8th and 9th. But he struck out Dave Winfield on a 3-2 changeup with 2 on and 2 out in the 8th and got Baylor in the 9th after a 4-pitch walk to Mike Pagarlio. I'm sure I butchered the name. Quote, "It was like I was levitating on the mound," Seaver told a room full of reporters afterward. "I hadn't felt like that since 1969 when I was going for a perfect game against the Cubs. Just like then, this was a constant emotional drain," end quote. The crowd had been on its feet near the end, and so had Tony La Russa, the Chicago manager, who was ejected in the sixth after disputing a play at the plate in which one of the White Sox, Rudy Law, was thrown out. Quote, "The rules say I've got to be in the clubhouse," La Russa said, "but I wasn't going to miss this game. I watched it from the runway. This is Seaver going for 300 for history. I had to be there," end quote. Seaver did it on his first try in the town where he began and where he won his first major league game in 1967 for the Mets. He was 22 then, and yesterday he said he was happy he did not have to wait any longer for this victory. Quote, "I'm glad this didn't last," he said. "My father's 74 years old, and it would have been tough for him to take a plane and follow me around every time," end quote. So think about that. I mean, think about all the context. I mean, first of all, you had Tony La Russa when he was actually, beloved by the White Sox nation, although he eventually gets fired. But you got all these Hall of Famers. I mean, he strikes out Dave Winfield to get out of a jam. And Hall of Famer Carlton Fisk catches that milestone. And Seaver, that was part of his year and a half with the White Sox, signed in 1985. Went 16-11 that season for the White Sox through 238 and 2/3 innings. And think about that. At 40 years old, went well over 200. He started the 1986 season with the White Sox before being dealt in June to the Red Sox for Steve Lyons, another like pop culture icon. What was it? The Cubs Sox crosstown, where he played like all different positions and how he, adjust himself in front of everybody by pulling down his pants, all that type of stuff. I know Steve Lyons, he was an interesting character. Seaver did go on to win 311 games in his career, and he had a career 109.9 B WAR. So think about that. It was just eating up innings left and right, getting wins, striking guys out. But you always associate him with the Mets. But the biggest milestone that he hits that really cements his Hall of Fame career, that puts that first ballot stamp on there, is 300 wins with the White Sox. Well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the all-new Locked On MLB Game Night. Every game, every night, all season long, get local analysis on a national scale. Find MLB Game Night on Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. And I'll be back tomorrow with Sam Phelan, SouthsideShowdown.com, and Survivor Fame. We're going to kind of take a look back at the White Sox trade deadline moves and non-moves after, the smoke is now cleared. We've got a little bit more insight. We've got kind of all the news coming out. We've kind of had a week to see kind of what this team is like post-trade deadline. So I'm going to have Sam coming on for that. Feel free to leave comments about today's discussion regarding Colson Montgomery having the highest ceiling of the young players that are currently up with the team, possibly extending Luis Robert Jr. That was my proposal. And this week's Way Back Wednesday segment, you can leave them at the episode page on YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, at Todd J. Dub or at Locked On Sox, or you can email me, LockedOnWhiteSox@gmail.com. Have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow.